Stage is Alesha Cronie, software development engineer at OfferUp, talking to us about user-centric API design, crazy or spot on. Hi, welcome, Alesha.
Hi, Prasad. Thank you.
Can you share? You have a slide to share, right?
Yes. Can you see my slide? Okay.
Yeah. Can you? Oh, yep. Okay. You want to put it into the presentation mode?
Should already be in presentation.
It's there.
Mode. Does it look there? Let me do that one more time.
I think on the top right. Yeah. Present.
Oh, it'll still only look
I think it's the same. Okay.
We'll still look with that. Does that work for now? We'll look with that.
Yeah, that works. Over to you then. We'll join you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Let's see. Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to get started here. Hi everyone at Apidays. I'm super excited to be here and give my talk about user-centered API design. I'm really excited to be here for two reasons, actually. This is my first talk at a conference ever, so excited to be doing it at API Days. It's a great conference. It's been going really well so far. So some of the, and the other other reason why I'm really excited to talk about this, that in my career so far, some of my biggest failures and successes have come from API design. So I'm excited to share some of my learnings there. So as I was preparing my presentation, I was doing some research, and I actually found that 66% of developers expect to use more APIs in 2020 than they did in 2019. And even more interestingly, of the companies surveyed, 74% of those companies said they want to use more internal APIs than external APIs. And so this is a huge investment because that means that at a software company, at a tech company, either the majority of developers are either consuming and integrating APIs written by their coworkers, or they're building APIs that are going to be consumed by their coworkers. So this really shows that it's important to get the API right from the get-go, which means that the design has to be right from the start. So when I think of API design, I tend to think of the house analogy. So similar to kind of building a house, you have your architect, you have the contractor that's doing the actual building, and you tend to have, like the owner of the house who gives the requirements. So if you think about kind of a scenario where building a house can go bad is where, the owner says, I really want to have at least 20 outlets in the house. And that gets communicated from the architect to the contractor, and the contractor puts 20 outlets in the house, but they put them all in on the first floor. This is not what you're looking for. Really, the owner of the house was looking for having 20 outlets spread throughout the house, one in each room, to satisfy the requirements. And so this is really similar to APIs. Oftentimes requirements come from the business, oftentimes the product team, and it's up to the engineer in this case to implement those requirements and build, the API in such a way that it fulfills the needs of the business and the users. And also similar, this analogy can be extended where once an API is out in the world, it can be difficult to change. So, oftentimes APIs are built to meet a particular need, maybe a business requirement, but then later if we find out maybe we got it wrong or the business needs have changed, we want to make sure that APIs continue to be backwards compatible. We don't want to introduce breaking changes. So that really highlights why from the get-go it's important to design your API right. And so in my experience, the best way that I've come to do that is to start from the user. So before I jump into how to leverage the user to design APIs, I want to introduce myself. So my name is Alesha Cronie. I'm a senior software development engineer at OfferUp. So OfferUp is a company in Seattle, Washington, the United States. It's a startup. They're the largest mobile marketplace for local buyers and sellers in the United States. We handle about 20 million monthly active users on our app and website, and we're a top 5 shopping app in the App Store, which is very exciting. Specifically for me, I work on Commerce's engineering team, and so we're responsible for the user experience for buyers and sellers when they want to buy or sell their items using digital payments on the app, and when they want to use shipping. All right, so let's get into user-centered design. So to start off, I want to introduce what I like to call the user design model. And so this is a 4-part model. It starts with the purpose, which is a centralized purpose. And then around that, there's a couple of phases that you want to walk through. So you want to walk through first to define your user space, then you want to role play your users and question your users. It's an iterative model. So you'll start the model with the purpose and then move on to the next phase. But even once you get to the question your user space, you can keep going and go through the define, role play, and question phases again until you have all the information you need. So there's no set number of loops to go through, and I'll cover later, what's the right place to stop and when you can say, I'm done finishing designing my API and I want to move into the implementation phase. So instead of kind of lecturing about the model, what I thought we would do instead is we'll use an example, kind of a use case that we'll walk through together. And we'll use that to kind of design an API, and we'll use this model to design the API. All right, so let's introduce our use case first. So for this, I really want you to imagine you're an engineer at a tech company, and they have a mobile app. And so you're given requirements from your product team to allow buyers to purchase bananas on your app. And so this is a new feature. Maybe you haven't, as a company, we haven't sold things before. So this is completely new. And so after some deliberation, we decide the best way to do this is to build an internal API that will then be consumed by the mobile app. All right, so now we have our requirements. We're just going to walk through together how we can utilize the user design model to design the API. So first, where we want to start is we want to define the purpose of our API. And so to kind of start things off, I wanted to actually go over what is just the definition of purpose in general. And so Oxford Dictionary defines purpose as the reason for which something is done or created, or for which something exists. And that's actually really close to how the user design model defines purpose. So the model defines purpose as the problem space that your API exists in. And so it's important to define your purpose up front, because we're going to kind of use it as our North Star as we're designing the API. So if we go back to our use case, right, we had said that the requirement that we received is to enable users to purchase bananas on the app. And so to do so, we need to, as the engineers, we need to now think about the requirements and ask, what are the requirements about, and what is the use case about? And the best way that I like to go about doing that is I think about what's the user experience. So for our use case, again, so we want to think about a user who, they need to go to the app, they need to be able to find what they want to buy. In this case, that's bananas. Then they'll need to give, payment information, they'll need to give shipping information, they'll need to review that. And then at some point, they'll have to actually click the buy button. And then usually you get a receipt. And those are the generic steps that no matter where you go to purchase anything, that's generally what you follow. But as a developer who has to turn that experience, has to build an API to meet the needs of the user, that's much too broad. So we want to break it down. So in our use case, the way that I want to break that down is into 3 parts. I will break it down into the first piece, which is the finding what to buy. In this case, that's bananas. The second piece, which would be the ordering experience. So in this case, we want to order bananas. And then the third piece, which is kind of the payment capabilities, which will enable you to order. And so for our use case, we'll go with the purpose of our API is to order bananas. And so kind of, again, once you have your purpose, this will tie all the components together. It's particularly important later down the road. It'll enable you to, if a new requirement comes in, it'll enable you to go, hey, gut check, does this fit the purpose of my API? If it doesn't fit the scope, we can say, hey, this isn't, either our API is not meeting needs, or we need to build another API. And then kind of one red flag is that you shouldn't have too many purposes per API. It'll get too messy, it'll become too big. All right, so now that we've defined our purpose to be ordering bananas, we can move on to the second step in the model. So the second piece is to define your users. So in general, there's three types of users that I've come across. There's the end customer, there's the client developer, and then there's what I like to call the next developer. So each of these three users are important, and each of them provides a unique perspective that you'll want to consider when you design your API. So let's take our use case and define each of these user types for our use case. So for the end customer, we know that it's the buyer who wants to purchase bananas. And some general tips for this customer is they're generally the user that doesn't know the API exists. So they're the ones who are using your app, your website, and they don't know that there's an API doing work in the background. For the next kind of user type, there's the client developer. So this is the user who will integrate with your API. They're generally also technical, right? They're not familiar with your implementation of the API, but they'll become experts in how to use your API. And then there's the last kind of user, what I like to call the next developer. And this is really your teammate. So this is the person who's going to own and maintain the API after you. So you want to keep each of these three in mind as we move through the model. So the next step of the model is to role play your users. So now we've defined our API purpose, which is to order bananas. We've defined three users, three different user types. And so what we now want to do is we want to role play each of these users and figure out what's important to them. And so this is really a broad step where we want to gather information. This is where we want to spend the bulk of our time. We want to build out context that we can then use as engineers to drive our technical decision making. And so the way to do that is to ask who, what, when, where, why, and how questions. And so if we take our use case again, so we know the purpose of our API is to purchase bananas. And let's say we want to ask these questions of the end customers, the person who wants to buy bananas. And so we could ask them like, well, how many bananas do you want to buy? Do you want to be able to change how many bananas you buy at any time? Where in the app do you want to buy bananas? What kind of bananas do you want to buy? Like all these questions, when you ask them of the end customer, what they'll end up doing is they'll drive what kind of data you want to put in your API contract. And so your API contract tends to define, right, your requests and your responses. And so the end customer is really the user we're trying to satisfy. And so what the API provides has to meet their requirements. The next kind of user, like let's say we ask the client developer the same questions to get the context that we need from them. We could ask them questions like, how do you plan on integrating my API? Or when do you plan on calling my API? And the answers to those questions when you ask the client developer can drive what API level technologies you want to use, or even sort of what kind of API you want to build. So let's say the client developer goes, well, I have limited technical resources, and I can only set up a nightly process to call your API. This would be completely unusual for an ordering experience. But if we kind of roll with this example, we would go, okay, so then you're going to send me like a batch of orders instead of sending me orders in real time. And so the API and maybe the technologies that you use for that will be different. The second important piece where the client developer, what they drive is the ease of use. So at the end of the day, like if you have your API, it has to be integrated with and it has to be used. And so this is where the client developer comes in, especially if you're building external APIs. If you're using maybe like obscure technologies, or the way that your API requests are formatted are difficult to build on the client side, you're not going to get high adoption on your API. So if you ask the client developer questions like, how do you plan on implementing my API? Things like, are you going to use GraphQL? Are you going to call them directly? What kind of data does the client developer have access to? That'll help drive how easy your API is to use. So the next kind of user that we had identified in our use case was the next developer. And so this user, the questions you want to ask, you want to still ask them the same, what, why, what, when, where, and how questions. But what you get from them will drive a different piece of your API design. So the next developer will be the next owner of your API. And what they can drive is to make sure that your design is, maintainable, that your API isn't going to be locked into a specific implementation. And so you want to get context from each user, and by asking these who, what, when, where, why, and how questions, and that will help drive your technical decision making. All right, so we've gone through so far, and we've defined our purpose, we've defined our users, we've kind of role played them, and then now we're at the phase in the user design model where we want to question those users. So up until this point, we've spent most of our time gathering and defining information. So by the time we get to this step in the model, we should have a lot of information to process. And as you process this information and you're trying to make the information specific enough for you to build your design off of, you want to keep asking two questions. So one, you want to ask, is the user right? So did they correctly identify what they want? And then even if the user did correctly identify what they want right now, did they consider what they may want in the future? So even though I've just said, the user is the most important and we're going to use them to drive our API design, we always, as developers, we need to challenge users and ask them, questions like, well, you've given the requirement to enable the buyer to purchase bananas, but in the foreseeable future, as a business, might we want to sell other items besides just bananas? Do we really only ever want to sell bananas? And so the answers to these types of questions will change kind of the definitions and information we just gathered in the previous steps. So then what we need to do is we'll need to loop through the model again and iterate on our understanding. So let's kind of recap what we just walked through. So we just completed one whole loop of the model. So we started with what was the purpose of our API, which was to order bananas. We then defined, our 3 different user types. And then we went and we asked these users kind of how, what, when, where, why questions to build context and find out what's important to each user. And then we took a step back and said, is that really correct? And if not, then we can loop through again and gain more information. And so this is really kind of the difficult part and the key. You want to keep looping until you feel confident that you've gathered enough information, that the information is stable and it won't change in the near future, and that you'll stop uncovering new kind of pieces of information that are impactful. And this is really the hard part. And if there's no set answer to this, it'll kind of depend on the project size, the level of experience of the developer. All right, so we just walked through only just one loop. So I kind of want to take our use case again of ordering banana and walk through what it could look like if we did multiple loops using the user design model. So this is just the information we had just gathered in our last loop. And at the end of that loop, we asked 2 questions. So during the role play phase, we may have asked, well, what actions does the user need to perform to buy bananas? And then we may have also, said after we gathered on the info, are we sure that we really only ever want to sell bananas? And so with that, we can start the second loop of the user design model and realize that our original purpose of ordering bananas was not going to meet the business needs. So we can say, okay, well, let's broaden it. We just want to say we want to order fruit. This enables us to be more flexible in the future. And when we were role-playing the user and we asked the end customer, well, what actions does the user need to perform? We actually realized that this buyer is much more complex and they want to do multiple things. So they want to give their delivery information, right? They want to select a payment method. They want to place a specific order for, X number of bananas. They want to receive confirmations that the order was placed. And so each of these things, we've now gathered more context. And what we can actually do is say, oh, each of these things are individual units. They all still fit the purpose of ordering fruit. But so we'll turn each of these units into individual API endpoints. So if we kind of keep going with the same thought process, maybe the next question we want to ask, well, okay, great. The user wants to receive confirmation the order was placed. How would the user like to receive this confirmation that the order was placed? And then, we kind of still keep pushing and prodding and saying, do we really only want to sell fruit? That still sounds pretty limiting. That doesn't seem right. And so if we enter loop 3, we go, okay, as a business, we have identified, it doesn't make sense to put the investment, time, and energy into building an API that can only be used for ordering fruit. It's not very extensible, it's not flexible, and it'll lead eventually to breaking changes when the business needs expand. So we're going to design an API that can order items. And then if we take kind of a specific look at the define section where we defined our users, we now realize that the user doesn't just want a confirmation that the order was placed, they want to receive a receipt. And so, this will enable us to say, okay, we need a specific API endpoint to do that. And then when you look at that, we know, okay, well, receipts require accuracy. Receipts require that they be received in real time. So maybe, it's better to maybe use a synchronous API versus an asynchronous API, or want to use technology that can that can ensure accuracy. Right. So now that we've kind of gone through what 3 loops of the model look like, so here we'll go and kind of review the model again. So you want to start with defining the purpose, and then you want to go and define your users, role player users, and question users. And as you iterate on it, you'll refine your design over time, and hopefully you'll end up at a place where your API design is much more stable, can be used in the future to meet future business needs, and doesn't need to be have any breaking changes introduced. All right, that's really it for my presentation. So thank you guys. I put my contact information up. Feel free to shoot me an email. If anyone wants to reach out, ask questions, or share what kind of design models have worked for them, I always love hearing about those. So. All right, are there any questions?
Yep, thanks, Alesha. There is one question. Can we also look at how these apps earn their share? Example, commissions. I think it's much more on the scenario that you used.
Yeah, so if I understand the question correctly, it's like, how can you take a look at how you want to design your API so that you can earn your commission as a business if you're creating like an API to order items? And I mean, all that you'll want to identify in the model. You want to identify that not only is the user of your API the buyer, but it might also be your company that's earning money off of the purchases. And so you'll need to make sure that that's a piece of your API design, that in the background you're collecting the right information you need to charge the commission. Yeah. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah. Great. Thanks a lot, Alesha. This helped. So far, I always looked at API design as something more from a technical side, and I think this has sort of made it easy from a business perspective also.
Yeah,
great.
awesome.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, that was a wonderful session. Thank you.